This mango costs $50, a single fruit, and there's a waiting list to buy it. In Japan's Miyazaki prefecture, farmers grow the most expensive mango on earth, a fruit so rare, so precisely cultivated, that it's given as a wedding gift, sold at luxury department stores, and once auctioned for $3,500 for a single pear. How does a mango become worth more than a smartphone? The answer involves 600 days of obsessive care, a banned farming technique, and a quality standard so strict that only 1 in 10 mangoes makes it to market. This is the story of Japan's Miyazaki mango, and why the world's most expensive fruit comes from a small island in southern Japan. Miyazaki Prefecture sits on the southeastern tip of Kyushu, Japan's southernmost major island. It's one of the few places in Japan with a subtropical climate, long hot summers, mild winters, and over 2,000 hours of sunshine per year. For most of Japan's history, this wasn't considered a farming advantage. The region was better known for tourism and surfing than agriculture. But in the 1980s, local agricultural researchers began experimenting with tropical fruits that Japan had always been forced to import. Pineapples, papayas, passion fruit, and one fruit that would change everything, the mango. The variety they chose was the Irwin mango, originally developed in Florida, USA. But what Miyazaki farmers did with the Irwin mango over the next 4 decades transformed it into something entirely unrecognizable from its American origins. They didn't just grow it, they engineered perfection. Growing a Miyazaki mango begins not with a seed, but with a cutting, taken from a parent tree that has already proven its ability to produce premium fruit. These cuttings are grafted onto rootstock in a carefully controlled nursery, and the young tree spends its first year being meticulously shaped and pruned. Then it's transferred to a specialized greenhouse, not just any greenhouse. Miyazaki mango greenhouses are precision-engineered environments where temperature, humidity, light levels, and even CO2 concentration are monitored and adjusted daily. Temperature is critical. Mango trees require warm days, between 30 and 35 degrees Celsius, but cool nights to trigger flowering. Miyazaki farmers manipulate this cycle artificially, using heating and ventilation systems to create the exact temperature differential that signals the tree to bloom. Once flowers appear, every single blossom is hand-pollinated by the farmer. No bees, no wind, just a small brush and hours of patient, precise work, because natural pollination in a greenhouse produces incomplete results, and inconsistency is unacceptable in Miyazaki farming. Think about what this means. Every Miyazaki mango you've ever seen was literally touched by human hands, flower by flower, before it ever existed as a fruit. After pollination, the young fruits begin to develop. Farming introduces its most visually striking technique. Each individual mango is placed into its own small mesh net, which is then hung from the greenhouse ceiling. The mango grows suspended in the air, rotating slowly as it develops. This is called the hammock method, and it's the secret behind the Miyazaki mango's most distinctive feature, its perfect, blemish-free skin. In traditional mango farming, fruit rests against branches or leaves as it grows, creating pressure marks, abrasions, and uneven color development. The hammock method eliminates all physical contact. Every surface of the mango receives equal sunlight exposure, producing the deep, uniform crimson-red color that makes Miyazaki mangoes instantly recognizable. But the hammock serves a second purpose that's equally important. By hanging the mango so that the stem faces downward, gravity pulls the fruit's natural sugars toward the tip, creating a uniquely sweet flavor concentration at the bottom of the fruit that regular mangoes simply don't have. This technique took Miyazaki farmers over 20 years to perfect, and it cannot be easily replicated because it requires constant adjustment. The nets are repositioned and rebalanced multiple times per week throughout the fruit's 4-month development period. What you're watching right now is 4 months of growth compressed into seconds. A Miyazaki mango, developing from blossom to harvest. If this is the kind of extraordinary farming story you love, hit that subscribe button. We release new agricultural documentaries every single week. Now let's talk about what makes these mangoes so incredibly exclusive. Here's what separates the Miyazaki mango from every other premium fruit in the world: the rejection rate. When harvest time arrives, typically between April and August, each mango is individually inspected against a set of criteria so demanding that most fruits fail. To qualify as a certified Miyazaki Taiyo no Tamago, which translates to egg of the sun, each fruit must meet all of the following standards. Weight: minimum 350 grams. Any fruit below this threshold is automatically rejected, regardless of appearance. Sugar content: minimum 15 bricks, a measure of natural sugar concentration. A standard supermarket mango typically measures 10 to 12 bricks. Miyazaki mangoes must reach 15 or above. Some exceptional fruits reach 20 bricks, making them almost overwhelmingly sweet. Color: a minimum of 50% of the skin surface must be the deep crimson red color. Fruits with patches of green or yellow, regardless of flavor quality, are rejected. Skin condition: 0 blemishes, 0 pressure marks, 0 irregular shapes. The result? In an average harvest season, only 1 in 10 mangoes grown in Miyazaki greenhouses meets every single criterion. The remaining 90% are sold at lower prices to domestic markets or used for mango juice, sorbet, and other processed products. That 10% rejection rate, combined with the 600 days of labor required to produce each fruit, is the foundation of the Miyazaki mango's price. If you've never visited a Japanese department store fruit section, nothing can quite prepare you for the experience. In Tokyo's Isetan department store, one of Japan's most prestigious retailers, Miyazaki mangoes are displayed under individual spotlights, each fruit resting in its own padded foam cushion inside a wooden presentation box. They are sold as luxury gifts, given for weddings, business relationships, and special occasions. The gift of a Miyazaki mango communicates care, respect, and serious financial generosity. The market operates in tiers. Standard certified Miyazaki mangoes, the base level, sell for $30 to $50 per fruit at major department stores. Premium grade mangoes, larger, higher sugar content, flawless skin, sell for $80 to $120. And at the annual season opening auction held in Miyazaki City, the very first harvest of the year, a symbolic pair of the season's finest mangoes is auctioned to the highest bidder. In 2023, a pair of Miyazaki mangoes sold at auction for $3,500 USD. The buyer? A local hotel chain using the purchase as a publicity event. Overseas, the market is growing rapidly. Chinese luxury consumers, the same demographic driving the wild boar meat market, have developed a strong appetite for Miyazaki mangoes. In 2022, China imported over $8 million worth of Miyazaki mangoes, making it the largest export market by value. The success of Miyazaki mangoes has triggered something fascinating: a global race to replicate the model. In India, the world's largest mango producer, farmers in Maharashtra and Andhra Pradesh have begun adopting Miyazaki growing techniques, producing their own red Irwin mangoes for domestic luxury markets. Early results have been impressive. Indian Miyazaki-style mangoes have sold for up to $20 USD each by Indian market standards. In Thailand, Vietnam, and the Philippines, agricultural research centers are experimenting with premium mango cultivation using Japanese techniques. Even Australia and the United States have begun producing small quantities of premium Irwin mangoes using modified versions of the Hammock method. But here's the uncomfortable truth that Japanese farmers are very much aware of. The Miyazaki brand advantage is not permanent. The moment another country successfully produces mangoes that meet the same quality standards at a lower price point, the premium commanded by the Miyazaki label will erode. This is why Miyazaki farmers are already investing in the next phase, developing entirely new mango varieties that can only be grown in Miyazaki's specific climate conditions. If the fruit itself becomes irreplaceable, the brand becomes unbeatable. A single farmer, 600 days of work, one fruit. The Miyazaki mango is the most complete expression of what Japanese agricultural philosophy calls takumi, the mastery of craft taken to its absolute limit. In a world where food production is almost entirely focused on volume, efficiency, and cost reduction, Miyazaki farmers chose the exact opposite path and built one of the most profitable agricultural operations on Earth. The lesson isn't that you should grow expensive mangoes. The lesson is that in agriculture, there is always a market for perfection, if you're willing to pay the price of achieving it. If you found this story as extraordinary as I did, subscribe to AgriWorld Docs. We release a new farming documentary every single week. And drop a comment. Would you spend $50 on a single piece of fruit? I genuinely want to know your answer. See you in the next documentary.